You were taught to believe in one God. Or maybe you were taught to reject one. Either way, someone drew you a line a long time ago. Good on one side, evil on the other. Creator on one side, devil on the other. You probably never even questioned who drew that line in the first place. But what if that line was never real? What if there was a being older than that whole argument? A being ancient mystics believed sat above your creator, above the one who built this messy, broken world. Not evil, not good, something else entirely. Something that swallowed the whole argument whole and never bothered to pick a side. His name is Abraxas, and for almost 2,000 years, people have carved his image into stones, whispered his name in secret rooms, and quietly tried to bury the idea he represents. Not because he was weak, because he was too dangerous to explain simply. Today, we're not burying it anymore. I'm going to show you exactly who he is, why he was hidden, and why this idea refuses to stay dead no matter who tries to kill it. But first, you need to understand why he had to disappear in the first place. Here's my honest opinion right up front, before we go any further. I don't think Abraxas disappeared from mainstream religious memory by accident. I think he was pushed out on purpose, slowly, over centuries, by people who needed simpler stories to survive. Think about it. Most spiritual systems you grew up around love a clean split. Light versus dark. Heaven versus hell. Us versus them. That split is simple. It's easy to teach a child. It's easy to build an entire institution around. You don't need nuance to tell someone, be good or be punished. Abraxas breaks that system on purpose, just by existing. He wasn't built to be the good guy or the bad guy. Ancient Gnostic thinkers described him as a force that contained both creation and destruction, mercy and cruelty, God and devil, fused into a single, unified being. That idea is uncomfortable to sit with. It doesn't give you an easy enemy to fight or an easy savior to follow blindly. It asks something harder of you. And when an idea refuses to fit into a simple box, powerful institutions tend to quietly push it toward the edges. Not always with violence. Sometimes just with silence. Stop teaching it in the schools. Stop mentioning it from the pulpit. Let it fade into obscure texts nobody reads anymore. That's what happened to Abraxas for centuries. But he never actually vanished. He just went underground, waiting patiently for people curious enough to dig him back up and ask what he really meant. You're one of those people right now, whether you knew it an hour ago or not. There was a man in the city of Alexandria who taught something so dangerous, he only spoke it out loud to a small circle of trusted students, behind closed doors, away from wandering ears. His name was Basilides. He lived in the 2nd century, and he's considered one of the earliest and most influential teachers of what we now call Gnostic Christianity, a movement that believed true spiritual knowledge, not blind obedience, was the actual path to freedom from this world. Basilides didn't teach a simple Sunday morning theology you could summarize in a single sentence. He taught a full cosmic map, layered like an onion. Layers of heaven stacked on top of each other, each one ruled by a different power, each one further removed from the true, unknowable source of everything that exists. And at the very top of that entire map, above every layer, above every ruler, above even the one who built our physical world, he placed Abraxas. I find that detail incredible every single time I sit with it. This wasn't some vague myth passed around a campfire for entertainment. This was a structured, mathematical, deeply thought-out cosmology, built by a man risking his safety to teach it. Basilides even used numbers to prove his point, which we're about to get into. He risked real danger teaching this openly. Ideas like his were labeled heresy by the growing religious authorities forming around him. And yet people kept teaching it anyway, generation after generation, in secret, because once you actually understand what Abraxas represents, it becomes very hard to unsee. So let's get into what he actually is, piece by piece. Here's where it gets strange, in the best possible way. In Greek, letters double as numbers. And if you take the letters in the name Abraxas and add up their numerical values, you get exactly 365. The number of days in a single year. The full, complete cycle of the sun through the sky. That's not a coincidence to the people who use this name with such care. To them, Abraxas wasn't just another god among gods. He represented totality itself. The whole cycle. Everything the universe does in one complete loop, folded into a single 7-letter name. Now picture how they depicted him, because this image is genuinely unforgettable once you actually see it. A rooster's head, symbolizing vigilance and the rising sun. An awareness that never fully sleeps, that watches even in the dark. A human torso, grounding him in something relatable, something almost uncomfortably close to us. And instead of legs, two serpents coiling downward, representing wisdom, transformation, and the tangled, twisting nature of the material world itself. In his hands, a whip and a shield. Discipline in one palm, protection in the other. I'll be completely honest with you. The first time I saw an actual ancient carving of Abraxas, it unsettled me more than I expected. And I don't think that reaction is an accident at all. I think that image was designed to sit uncomfortably in your mind on purpose, because Abraxas himself isn't meant to be comfortable. He's meant to hold contradiction without flinching, without apologizing for it. Rooster and serpent, human and monster, light and shadow welded into one single body. That's the entire point of the image. Now, if you've spent any real time in Gnostic ideas before, you already know about the Demiurge, the flawed, sometimes arrogant architect believed to have built our physical world out of ignorance rather than pure intention. In a lot of Gnostic teaching, the Demiurge gets mistaken for the ultimate god, when really he's just a lower power, cut off from the true divine source, ruling through law, judgment, and rigid control. Most people who get introduced to Gnosticism stop right there. Demiurge bad, escape the material world, spiritual knowledge good, end of story, roll credits. But that's not actually the end of the story. That's only the middle. Because above the Demiurge, above the one who set the rigid rules of this world, Basilides placed Abraxas. And here's the part that changes absolutely everything. Abraxas isn't the Demiurge's opposite. He's not the good god sent in to fight the bad god. That would just be the same tired binary again, wearing a slightly fancier costume. Abraxas sits above the entire argument, untouched by it. He contains the Demiurge, and whatever the Demiurge opposes, both at once, without contradiction. Creation and destruction aren't enemies to him. They're just two hands doing one single job. And honestly, I think that's the more mature idea, by a wide margin. I think most of us go through a phase where we want a clean villain and a clean hero, because it feels safer to stand somewhere solid. It gives us something simple to root for. But the older you get, the more you realize the real world rarely hands you anything that clean, and neither does your own mind. Abraxas doesn't ask you to pick a side. He asks you to understand that the sides were never really separate to begin with. That's a much harder pill to swallow. But I think it's a truer one, and I'd rather sit with something true and uncomfortable than something simple and false. Here's the part of this story that genuinely gets me every single time I revisit it. You'd think an idea this old, taught in whispers almost 2,000 years ago, would have quietly died out completely by now. But it didn't. It resurfaced in one of the most unexpected places imaginable, inside the private mind of Carl Jung. Carl Jung was a Swiss psychiatrist, the founder of what's called analytical psychology, and one of the most influential thinkers in the entire history of studying the human mind. During a period of intense personal crisis, Jung wrote a strange, dreamlike text called 7 Sermons to the Dead. In it, he describes a God who exists above the God humans normally worship, a God who unites all opposites within a single person. Good and evil, male and female, light and dark, held together without collapsing. He names that God Abraxas without hesitation. Jung wasn't casually borrowing a cool ancient word for style. He was pointing at the exact same truth Basilides pointed at almost 2,000 years earlier. That real psychological wholeness doesn't come from picking one side of yourself and rejecting the other completely. It comes from holding both sides at the same time, awake, without flinching. This is the part one really want you to sit with for a second. An idea labeled dangerous, heretical, and buried by religious authorities in the 2nd century somehow became one of the seeds of modern psychology's entire understanding of the human shadow self. That's not a coincidence to me at all. That's proof the idea was too true to actually be killed off. You've probably already crossed paths with Abraxas without even realizing it, maybe more than once. Ancient gemstones carved with his image, rooster head, serpent legs, whip in hand, were used as protective amulets for centuries, and collectors and museums still proudly display them today. His name and image made their way into esoteric orders, occult literature, and modern shadow work communities, where people explore the parts of themselves they were taught to hide from the world. If you've ever done any kind of inner work, journaling about your anger instead of suppressing it silently, sitting with jealousy instead of pretending it doesn't exist, trying to actually understand your darker impulses instead of just fighting them at every turn, you've been doing Abraxas's work without ever knowing his name. That's what makes this more than just ancient trivia to me. It's still alive in how a lot of us try to heal ourselves today, whether we call it that or not. So here's the real teaching underneath all the symbolism and history we've walked through together. Abraxas represents the idea that wholeness isn't found by defeating your darkness in some final battle. It's found by integrating it quietly, patiently over time, not indulging it recklessly, not pretending it isn't there either, understanding it and letting it sit at the same table as your light, without either one needing to win. I want to be very clear about something here, because I think it genuinely matters. I don't believe Abraxas is meant to be worshipped like a god you kneel down to. I think he's meant to be understood, the same way you'd study a mirror instead of praying to it. He shows you something true about the structure of existence, and about yourself, without ever demanding your obedience in return. That distinction changes everything about how you approach this idea. This isn't about picking a new god to serve instead of an old one you've outgrown. It's about outgrowing the need to split the universe and yourself into simple heroes and simple villains altogether. So where does that leave you, right now, after everything we've walked through? Honestly, the name Abraxas was never really the point of any of this. The point is the question hiding underneath it. Are you still splitting your world into good and evil, safe and dangerous, worthy and unworthy? Or are you ready to hold both sides of yourself at once, the way that ancient image does? Rooster and serpent, discipline and protection, light and shadow, standing in one body without falling apart. That question is older than almost every religion you've ever heard of, and it's still waiting patiently for you to answer it whenever you're ready. If this pulled something loose in you, drop the words, "I carry both" in the comments. Nothing else, just that. I want to see how many of us are actually ready to admit it out loud. Subscribe if you want more of these buried threads pulled back into the light. Because some names get erased because they're dangerous. And some get erased because they're true.